Once again, for the recording, my name is Chuck Strawser. I work for UW-Madison as the pedestrian and bicycle coordinator. So my job is to accommodate and encourage everyone to walk or bike to and around campus. Today we're teaching a class. I'm teaching, this royal we. I'm teaching a class on how to select and buy and fit a bike for your needs. So I started teaching classes like this probably 30 years ago, which kind of dates me. And the choices were not quite as varied back then as they are now. But it's still true that the first thing you need to figure out is sort of what broad category of bike you need that will do what you want it to do, which is why I asked everyone to tell me what they were hoping to do with their bikes. Back then, I would tell people, if you want to ride in the mountains, or in dirt, then you buy a mountain bike. If you wanted to ride on the road, then you'd ride a road bike. And if you lived at the beach, you should just buy a beach cruiser, because most beaches are flat and beach cruisers are designed to withstand the marine environment. And that was about it. And then a little bit later, hybrids, which are somewhere between mountain bikes and road bikes, came into play, which was a good thing, because a lot of people bought mountain bikes basically just to ride on the road with a more comfortable stance. Road bikes at the time were mostly meant for racing and were meant to go fast and not very comfortable. Sort of like, oh, I don't know, you wouldn't drive a Formula One car to work every day. I'd rather you didn't drive anything every day. I'd rather you ride a bike. But you know, most people understand that analogy. Okay. So I think, if I remember, Han is looking to get into gravel riding, or thinking about buying a gravel bike. And a gravel bike is sort of a roadish bike that accommodates bigger tires that hold a larger volume of air, so it's more comfortable on more uneven surfaces. And so that's a whole new category. Yeah. For a city bike. Now, some people ride gravel bikes in the city because they have big enough tires that they're relatively comfortable. There's a lot of different ways you can go. Christopher, you know, frankly, I don't remember what you said your bike was, because what I heard from you was that you were mostly concerned about the fit for your wife's new bike and maybe getting a new bike.
Yeah, Chuck. It's I'm riding. It's a Greg LeMond. It's made for Charlie. It's a triple.
Okay, great. So are you, what I also heard, or what I think I heard, was that you were thinking about getting a different bike for you, or you're also thinking about getting a different bike for your wife, or you're just thinking about whether your wife's bike fits?
Both. So I'm looking, like you said, from a comfort position. I enjoy riding the bike, but it is, you know, down bars on it. And yep. So for casual riding, it's just a little bit too much. And for my wife, we purchased a bike for her, but now I don't know if it fits her properly. So you're correct on both, sir.
We'll go through all that. And I'm glad that you said that, because that brings up something that I also meant to say, is that it's a lot of people associate this style of handlebar with bikes that are uncomfortable. Let's see, I'm blocking the handlebar, the drop style bars. There's nothing inherently about drop style bars that make them uncomfortable. I think most people think that they're uncomfortable because, especially a decade or two ago, you would mostly find them on bikes that the entire bike was made to go very fast on the road. And so the bike was maybe not so comfortable for people that just wanted to ride around town. If you get the handlebars high enough and they're proportionate to your body and close enough to the saddle, then they're not necessarily uncomfortable. And in fact, on longer rides, I find them to be more comfortable because you have more hand positions and you can move your hands around, which can alleviate a lot of pain, especially if you have problems with nerves in your hands. So let's dispel that myth right away that this style of handlebar is uncomfortable. It is, however, harder to get this style of handlebar up as high as bars that are more like mountain bike bars, or have a lot of rise to them. Okay, so I think it's probably a good idea, if your wife is uncomfortable on that bike, to maybe look at a hybrid or something like that. something with, it doesn't, I guess it doesn't really matter as long as you stay away from bikes that are intended purely for some category of racing. It's generally possible to get a bicycle fairly comfortable no matter what your stance is, or what you want your stance to be. So let me talk about that a little bit. Let me show you basically a neutral starting point. This is my bike. This is my commuter bike. Note that I have carefully set it up for the purpose of this video with the crank arm in line with the seat tube. That's deliberate because I'm going to sit on the saddle and I'm going to show you how far your leg needs to be extended when the pedal is at the furthest distance from the saddle. Okay. Oh, I need to, sorry about that. Keep changing. Okay. Now can you see that? All right. Pedal.
That's better.
Crank arm in line with the seat tube. Okay. So this is the furthest distance from the saddle that the pedal is ever going to be in the rotation. This is not the furthest distance. That's at 6 o'clock. What I'm showing you is at about 5 o'clock. Okay. There we go. 5 o'clock. Okay. So when the pedal is in that position and you are on the bicycle, let's see if I can do this without a blooper. Okay. You should have just a very slight bend in your knee. And in fact, if you were to, and that's with the ball of your foot over the spindle or the center of the pedal. In fact, if you were to put the heel of your foot on the pedal, you would just be able to lock out your knee. You shouldn't have the seat high enough so that you can lock out your knee here because you might hyperextend it. But you also don't want the saddle so low that your knee is bent more like this, because if your knee is bent this when the pedal's at the lowest position, then it's going to be up like this when the pedal's at the top of the position. See, in fact, see, I don't know if you can see it past the bike, but see my other knee? That's as high as my other knee goes. You don't really want it to come a lot higher than that, or you could cause knee problems. So that's a good segue into thinking about what kind of bike you should buy and what size bike you should buy. Because when I have this bike was made specifically for me, so the proportions are right for me, but that doesn't make it right for everybody. And when I have the seat raised as high as it needs to go, then I cannot actually put both feet flat on the ground. So if you're uncomfortable with that, you might want a different style of bike. You'll notice that when I stand over the top tube, I still have about an inch clearance between the top tube and myself. And that's your minimum. There are lots of other styles of bikes that have sloping top tubes. This is your top tube right here. And mine is not quite parallel to the ground. Sometimes they're sloped quite a bit. What are called step-through frames are frames where the tube very deliberately goes down much lower, obviously to allow you to step through the frame. So if you're uncomfortable standing over bikes, then that might be a good way to go. You might also notice when I was sitting on the bike, I could just, I'm wearing Vans, which are, you see those yet? I have very, very thin soled shoes. In fact, they're not usually what I ride in. So they're even, my seat's even still a little bit too tall. But the other important thing to note is that in the wintertime, I wear hiking boots, which have a much thicker sole. So I actually raise the saddle, raise the seat by adjusting you loosen the ball right here and raise the seat post a little bit, basically to accommodate a different style of shoe. Now, in theory, you would do that, every time you change shoes, but in reality, I basically do it twice a year when I switch from, summer tires to winter tires, basically. But let's go back to the broad style of the bike and the fit of the bike. Bicycles are a lot like shoes. I like to say that a lot because I have probably too many bicycles, and people always ask me whether I can ride more than one at a time. And the answer is no, but I also have more than one pair of shoes, even though I can't wear more than one pair of shoes at a time. And I have different shoes for different purposes. Although you could, with the right pair of shoes, you could do just about everything you wanted to do. And that's also true of bicycles. So find something that's going to be appropriate, at least broadly appropriate for what you want to do. And so for Yash, I think that's probably something along the lines of a hybrid, or there are dedicated commuter bikes now, which are essentially based on the concept of a hybrid bike, which again is sort of somewhere in between road racing and mountain biking. Christopher's wife's probably going to want something along those lines too. Han wants a gravel bike. This is sort of a proto gravel bike. I mean, when I built it for commuting, so it only has one gear. And most people are going to want more than one gear for riding on unpaved roads that have a lot of elevation changes. But essentially, it's a gravel bike because it accommodates tires that are larger, wider, and hold a higher volume of air than typical skinny road racing tires. And it has, in my case, cantilever brakes, which are kind of outdated now. But the point is that they stop really well and still accommodate the bigger tire. Most every bicycle you see above a certain price point these days is probably going to have disc brakes, which accommodates whatever size tire you want to put on the wheel that comes in the bike. But you're still going to have constraints about the size tire that will fit on your bike because of the frame, because the tire still has to fit in between the stays here and the stays here and the fork blades here. That's another good place to start, is to think about how you want to use the bike and how big a tire you're going to need to use it the way that you want to use it. Because a triathlon bike, for example, is not going to make the best winter commuter, if that's what you want to do. Skinny tires require much higher pressure, and they have a lower volume of air, so they're going to have less rolling resistance, so they're more efficient, which is why they're used on road racing bikes. But they're also a lot less forgiving of potholes and hopping off curbs, and they tend to bounce you around more because they're higher pressure. There's no give to them. Okay, so this takes us back to figure out what you want to do, and you guys have already, everyone has kind of told me what they want to do, and then look for something that broadly fits the category of how you want to use it. But again, I wouldn't eliminate anything other than bicycles that are designed purely for racing, whether that's racing on the road or racing off-road. Now, fit. I already stood over the bike and showed you the minimum there. Bikes come sized from the manufacturers, either with an actual measurement in units, which is usually either inches or centimeters, or, you know, like clothing would come small, medium, large, extra large, that sort of thing. And one of the reasons why manufacturers are sort of moving towards at least marketing their bikes as extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, is because knowing the units of measurement that the number associated with the bike that the manufacturer is describing it isn't enough on its own. I don't even remember what this bike is, but traditionally you would have measured this bike from the center here to, most bikes would be measured to the center of the top tube here. And whatever the number that is, in my case, it's probably somewhere around 55 or 56 centimeters. But that tells you nothing about how that bike fits compared to something in a different brand, unless you know that both of those brands are measuring their bikes exactly the same way. Because some bikes, even historically 30 years ago, would have measured all the way to the top of this, which is at least another centimeter. And then some manufacturers even started measuring to the top of the seat tube, which is almost a couple of inches. And that's just with a bike that has a relatively parallel top tube. When you start getting into sloping top tubes, then everything else goes out the window. I've even seen bikes that were measured to some point, some theoretical point up here, which would be where the top tube would intersect with the seat post, if it were parallel, but has no relation to any actual measurement on the frame at all. It's just nominal. So what does that mean? It means don't assume that if you fit, say, an 18-inch bike in one brand and model, that you're going to fit an 18-inch bike in some other brand or even some other model of that same brand if it's a different style of bike, rather than just one that has nicer parts or maybe not as nice parts on it. So the best thing you can probably do, short of going to a shop that has a really good bike fitter and paying them money to spend a couple of hours looking at you riding essentially a stationary bike for the purpose of sizing, the best thing for you to do is to go and to ride the bicycles that you think would work for you and to figure out whether they're going to fit. You'll know immediately if it's too big, probably, because you won't be able to stand over it comfortably. It's harder to tell if a bike is too small because seat posts now come in very long lengths. But you'll know because it's not just this measurement that's important, but it's also the distance between the saddle and the handlebars. And that's a lot easier to change nowadays because stems come in quite a few different lengths and rises. So that's one way that you can modify a bike that you've already got. I remember Christopher talking about possibly modifying the bike that his wife's already got. And seat posts come not just in different lengths, but in what we call setback, which means how far back the saddle, the bolt that holds the saddle on, is from a line drawn through the center of the seat post and the seat tube. So this particular seat post has about a 25 millimeter or 1 inch setback. But it's common nowadays to find seat posts that have a 0 setback. So the saddle would be clamped in a neutral position directly over the seat post. And then of course you have a little bit of adjustability fore and aft. So those are ways that you can move the seat forward and backward to change this distance right here, because this distance right here is actually probably, well, not probably, it really is more important than this distance right here. Because as long as you can stand over the bike and the bike is close enough in size for you to make these adjustments, then you can make it fit really no matter what this is. But this distance is harder to change. This distance can be changed really just by loosening a bolt or a quick release here and moving the seat up and down, right? My wife is about 5'7" and I'm just a hair under 6 feet, and we can actually share several bicycles that I have set up with quick releases because I basically just raise and lower the seat. But we're close enough in size that this distance works for both of us. It is we're in a little bit different position. And let me talk to you about that position. I was going to tell you a neutral starting position. So I talked about how far your leg extension needs to be. But notice, let me set the pedal at a level spot. Can everybody see this? Yep, I can still see the pedals. Okay, so now the pedals are in at basically 3 and 9 o'clock, and my hands are on the handlebars in a place that I often use, which is on top of the hoods. And you can see that my body makes kind of a triangle. I don't know how to point it out now, but you can see I have a slight bend in my elbow and I have a bend in my knee, but my body makes basically an isosceles triangle. And that's pretty comfortable for me. These handlebars also allow me to put my hands right here, which allows me to sit a little bit more upright. I'm gonna change the hand position, or if I'm going downhill really fast, I might get into more aerodynamic tuck. But that's at least three hand positions right there, which is one of the reasons why I like these handlebars. But the important thing is that whether you have bars that you would hold like this or bars that you would hold like this, is that the handlebar width, wherever you're going to hold the handlebars, needs to be proportional to your body. If you have this style of handlebar, a very rough rule of thumb is that the width of the hood should be roughly about the same width as your shoulders. But these bars come in lots of different variations now, that and some that flare out at the sides. So you'd want to look at the width at the hoods and not down here. Bars that you find on mountain bikes or even hybrids now can be much wider, particularly if they're off-road racing. But nobody's talked about wanting to do that, so I wouldn't worry too much about the bikes that have really wide handlebars in order to accommodate rough terrain. But again, this measurement, the distance between the saddle and the handlebars is critical. So I talked about being able to adjust the saddle forward and backward. You can also change the stem. And in some cases, if you have, some bikes have a different style of stem that with a single bolt, it can be raised or lowered. That's good for adjustability. Just make sure that that bolt is tight if you're going to adjust it, or have the shop where you get the bike do that for you, because you don't want that loosening up while you ride. That's several different ways that you can get the bike, the handlebars close enough to the saddle and high enough to be comfortable. Now that isosceles triangle that my body was making, that's a starting point. It's also, for me, it's comfortable for commuting. But I have a cyclocross race bike where my back is much lower because that bike's made for racing. So it's a much more aggressive stance. And I also have a bike that I ride in the depth of winter when there's a lot of snow, that I'm sitting almost bolt upright because it allows me to see better. And because I'm generally going a lot slower because it's wintertime. And even though I have tires with studs that grip on the ice, it's still often pretty slick out there. So I'm typically going slower, and I want to maximize my field of vision. So I'm sitting much more upright. So that bicycle has much higher handlebars that also sweep back a little bit. And the seat is relatively lower, although I still have the correct leg extension because that's important. I need a drink of water. And
Hey, Chuck, I'm just going to give you a heads up. We had one person, Matthew, joined us. Matthew, do you have any specific questions you were hoping to get answered today? Everybody else already went through that.
No, not really. I think the handout will be good to go over. I've paid to have my bike fitted for me before, and that ends up being like $60 or $70 depending. And I actually just switched to a different bike, and I never got that one set up, but I recalled like some of the things that they were recommending as far as getting fitted. So I was looking at that. Not right now, but in the near future, I wouldn't mind getting a new bike, maybe an electric bike, maybe a fat bike. So that I know those are going to have different feels, and maybe it'd be important to make sure that I get the right size and have that fitted to me.
Yep. Fit is a very good thing to do, even if you have to pay somebody to do it. And the price can vary quite a bit. What you paid is actually kind of on the low end, I think. I've had fittings before that cost a lot more because I was fitting bikes that had pedals that you clipped into, and I had cleats on the bottom of my shoes. And those can be, depending on the structure of your feet and your legs and your body, those can be very fiddly in order to get the cleat exactly where it needs to be. So the fit expert that I was dealing with spent literally 45 minutes just adjusting the cleats on my bike, which is one reason why really the only bike I have left that has those sorts of pedals is the racing bike. I ride flats on everything else because then I don't have to worry about making sure that my cleats are adjusted properly, especially since every time you wear the cleats out, if you ride a lot, then you've got to do it all over again.
I did email all the participants the handout about fit, which we had a class help us develop that. And I think Chuck has not looked at it in 4 years, so he may not know exactly what's in it.
That's exactly right. That class was a while ago. And we went through a lot of revisions on that fit guide. So even if I think I remember what's on it, I may be remembering on an earlier iteration of it. And if you do pay for a fitting, you may end up talking about other things too. Like when you really get into the specifics of racing in any sort of category, racers, they want to win, and so they're looking for any competitive advantage. So you might even do things like the length of the crank arm can vary by usually 2.5 millimeter increments, which seems like nothing, but it can make a huge difference because basically the smaller the crank is, the smaller the diameter of the circle that your feet are spinning, which can be good or bad depending on what you're doing. And that was one of the things that really helped me when I finally got it fit. And I actually paid for a fit even after I've been working in shops for over a decade. And that's basically what they told me is I needed a crank length that was a little bit different by about 2.5 millimeters. And I needed a stem that was about a centimeter shorter. And that made a tremendous difference in how comfortable I was. That, of course, was for a racing bicycle. So it's maybe not so important if what you're doing is riding around town. But the point is that there's lots of little changes that you can make that individually don't seem like much, but they can add up to a big difference.
How's everybody doing? Does anybody have any questions at this point?
I think I've covered everything I want to cover about fit. I didn't really talk about actually buying a bike. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about that, especially in the context of what I'm sure we're all hoping is that the end of the pandemic. It's probably, unless you're already pretty conversant with the maintenance of bicycles and bike mechanics, I tend to recommend people to actually go to a shop and buy a bike. You can often get really good deals on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or some other venue like that. But if you're not confident in being able to ascertain whether the bicycle needs a lot of work, you could actually end up spending more money buying a used bike and then having to refurbish it than you might have spent just buying a new bike, which generally comes with a warranty of at least a few months or a year, which is also important for new bikes because things like the cables tend to stretch out. So things like your brakes and your derailleur cables might need fine adjustments. It's not a big deal, but it can be really annoying if you have a bike that's supposed to click shift the index and it doesn't index properly. So if you rotate the grip to shift it, or you pull a trigger to shift it, and it doesn't shift, or it shifts 2 cogs instead of 1 cog. Most reputable shops will adjust all that for free for a period of time because they want you to enjoy bicycling.
There are some shops that sell used bikes, and they safety check them for you too. So it may not have to buy a new bike, but buying from a shop means you get some reassurance.
And the concept is still the same. If you buy a used bike from a real bike shop, you're going to be paying sort of the top end of the used market for that bike. But you still might spend less money than if you bought a bike off of Craigslist, for example, because at least I know the shops in town in Madison that sell used bicycles, they've gone through and refurbished everything. So they've replaced all the parts that need to be replaced, whether it needs new cables and housing or brake pads. Brake pads are a big deal. You want the bicycle to be able to stop. So if the bike has worn out brake pads, you're going to figure at least $20 per wheel for pads, no matter what kind of brake it is. I mean, that's a very rough figure, but I mean, you see my point. A $50 bike is not such a great deal if you have to put $150 worth of parts into it and then, more labor on it. But it's also a good idea to establish a relationship with a shop, I think, because if you spend enough time with someone and they get to know what your needs are, just like I asked everyone when you registered for the class here, or when you showed up for the class here, what your needs were. Somebody that understands how you're trying to use the bike is going to help you to find something that fits and feels better. Yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say about buying a bike. Well, no, I guess it wasn't. You can often buy bicycles brand new directly online now. And again, if you know what you're doing and you're pretty confident in what you're buying, then that's not necessarily such a bad thing, and it can save you some money. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can end up spending a lot of money by basically needing to buy a bike twice. And the flip side to that argument is that if you don't support the local bike shops, when you do need help, they're not going to be around to help you, because the manufacturer that's selling you a mass-produced bike that they're shipping to you only partially assembled isn't going to be around when you need a flat fixed or whatever maintenance. You know, that's just not something that an online retailer can provide in person. It just doesn't happen. So I think it's a good idea to find a shop that you like and the people that working in the shop that you like, and support them, because they're the ones that help everybody keep their bicycles running. And bicycles are incredibly efficient. And the wonderful thing is that even if there are many things going wrong with a bicycle, it's often still rideable, which is not something you can necessarily say about more complex machinery. But every once in a while, everybody's going to need some help. So find some place that you like and deal with them. Does anybody have any questions about what I've said so far? I never intended to talk for the whole hour and a half. I wanted to leave some time for questions. But if nobody has any questions, I guess I'm going to talk for at least a few more minutes. Everybody's still here. I think I've said everything I wanted to say about selecting a bike and buying a bike and fitting a bike. I always like to point out to people that the key to keeping yourself safe when you're riding on the road with other traffic is being visible, predictable, alert, and assertive. And I teach an entire class just like this one, just on these 4 principles. So I'm not going to be able to do them justice today. But if you search YouTube for a video called "Enjoy the Ride: Essential Bicycling Skills," that's a 20-minute video that's produced by the League of American Bicyclists, which is a national organization that advocates for bicycle transportation, that also happens to certify people like me to teach riding safely on the road with traffic. And that video will tell you everything you need to know about these 4 principles for staying safe on the road. And other than that, really, nobody has any other questions about fitting? Kind of run through my repertoire of things to talk about for this class.
So any places you'd recommend?
Oh, yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm always hesitant to recommend individual shops for several reasons. One is that I think there's probably some policy about UW not endorsing vendors. But the more important reason is that I think that there are probably really competent people in all the shops, and also people that are learning to be competent. So I guess what I would suggest is go to the shops that are geographically proximate to you, because those are the ones that are going to be most convenient, or close to where you work or wherever you ride a bike, and see if you can spend enough time to figure out who the more experienced people are in those shops. Sometimes in the smaller shops, you might be talking, the person that you talk to about service might also be the person that's going to fix the bike. And that has pros and cons. It's much better for communicating what you need to do when you're talking to the person that's actually going to be working on the bike, because they've heard from you firsthand what your problems are. And also, it's always a good idea to tell people what your problem is. That's better than telling a mechanic, any sort of mechanic, what you think the solution is. So if you're having problems shifting, tell them that you have problems shifting. Don't tell them, I need a new rear derailleur, or I need a new cable. It's their job to figure out what you need. And then their job to tell you how much that's going to cost. And if you accept that, then it's their job to fix it. And that, but that works whether you're talking to an owner proprietor that's the sole employee of a shop, or whether you're talking to what's called a service writer at a larger shop whose often only job is to take bicycles in that people have problems with and literally write the service that needs to be done. So they're essentially diagnosing the problem with you in the store and giving you an estimate to telling you what they think it's going to cost to fix. And then it goes to a mechanic. And having been a mechanic myself, there are often really, really good mechanics that don't have, say, the highest customer service skills, which is why they're in the back working on the bikes and not talking to the customers up front. But figure out what works for you in the place where you ride a bike, which I hope is not totally a cop-out in answering your question. What do you think?
Oh, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? I guess it's also hard for me because I was a professional mechanic long enough that I do most of the work myself. So I basically only take my bicycle somewhere when I need something done that requires a tool that I don't already own. Or honestly, the older I get, sometimes I will pay somebody to do the jobs that I really hate doing, even if I'm capable of doing it myself.
Yeah, I think the Madison Bike Center in downtown runs free bicycle repair training workshops or things like that for half an hour each, I think.
Yep, they do. So do we. This class that you're watching right now, it happens basically once a month on a different topic, and at least 6 of the topics every year are on basic bicycle maintenance. Usually each class covers a different system of the bike, like brakes, or cleaning and lubricating your chain, or truing wheels, or adjusting shifters and derailleurs. So you can find all that on our website too, or you can come to our University Bicycle Resource Center when we reopen, as soon as we can hire some student employees to reopen it on campus. But the Madison Bike Center, which is newly located in the Judge Doyle Square parking garage, does also teach classes for free, and they probably teach them more often than we do. I haven't been to one yet. I've been meaning to go down and check it out. So, anybody else? Anything else? I guess I will say that we have, in addition to the handout on FIT, we have a handout on how to find a low-cost bike, which I think I actually updated, maybe not this year, but at least last year, with all the shops in town. That'll also give you good tips on places where you can go to a shop and buy a used bike that's been refurbished, which will probably cost you less than a new bike. Maybe Dark and
Yeah, I'm looking.
finding that and posting it on the chat too. I know I updated it, I think last summer, because we had some shops closed and some shops open.
Yep, working on it.
Great. Yeah, where to buy? That's a good question.
For general just tooling around, let's say on sort of like our bike trails, what do you think is a good range of gears?
Oh,
What's it like, because like there's bikes now with like we have a fixie, and there's ones that are up to 27 gears. Is that really necessary for like Madison?
well, it depends. I took a class in grad school 20 years ago taught by a lawyer, and that was his favorite answer to every question. So first of all, the number of gears that you have isn't quite as important as the range between the lowest and the highest gear, right? Okay. So having more gears is often, or more combinations of gears is often more convenient because you have smaller steps in between the gears. But an old-fashioned 3-speed might have the same range of gears as a bike that has 27. It just depends on what the size of the gears are. There's lots of variation. You mentioned the 27 speed. That would be a bike. The way that you would get 27 speeds on a bike typically is you'd have 3 chain rings up front and you'd have 9 cogs in the back. So that's 3 times 9 equals 27 different possible combinations. But the reality is a lot of those I won't get into the nitty gritty of it, but the gist is that a lot of those combinations are actually duplicate ratios and some of the duplicate ratios you shouldn't use because the thin line is really bad. So for example, if you had 3 chain rings, if the chain was on the middle chain ring, then you should be able to use all the cogs in the back. So you have 6 or 7 or 8, or there's already bikes with 11 and 12 cogs in the back now. But if you had 3 chain rings up in the front, you should probably only use the smallest chain ring with the inside half of the cogs. And if the chain was on the outside chain ring, you should probably only use the chain with the outside half. So even if you had, say, a bike with 27 gears, you really probably only get roughly half to 2/3 of those are gears that are not duplicated by some other combination that's mechanically poor, if that makes sense. But let me see if I can actually answer your question, which if I can remember it is, how many gears do you need, or what, to translate it, what is the gear range that you need in Madison? And the answer again is that it depends. I mean, you see, my bike has 1 gear, and except for the depth of winter, I ride this, well, I don't ride this out in the driftless area because there's some pretty steep hills out there. But I ride from, basically the near east side of Madison where I live to the near east, near west side of Madison. And I generally don't have a problem, although to be fair, I don't ride up and down Observatory Drive very often on this bike if I can avoid it. But I use 1 gear because it's simple to maintain and it lasts longer. But that doesn't work for everybody. Lots of people need more gears, including me, in certain situations, like when I'm carrying a lot of weight or it's winter. It's good that you're thinking about what gearing you need, because that's part of how you would decide whether to use a particular bike or another bike. But look at the specifications of the bicycle or talk to the salesperson about the gearing, because you could have a bike that has a modern, relatively recent road racing bikes might have 2 chain rings up front and 11 cogs in the back. So 22 possible combinations, although again, some are duplicates. But if it's a racing bicycle, the range between the lowest and the highest might be relatively narrow. It might even be narrower than a bike that had, say, 3 chain rings up front and 6 cogs in the back, which is not 6-speed rear drivetrains haven't been common for 30 years, but you might find a bike in one of the shops that sells used bikes that still has that sort of drivetrain. If it's new, it's probably fine. But the point is that if the range between the low and the high is really wide, then that matters more than how many different combinations you have.
Yep. Okay.
I think, and a lot of bikes nowadays have what are called one-by drivetrains, which means there's only 1 chain ring up front, but they have a lot of cogs in the back, and usually the cassette or the cog set is a really wide range. So it might have a really tiny smallest cog and a really, really large big cog, because it's only got 1 up front. So you've got to get the whole range of gears with just the variation in the back. And another thing that I didn't really talk about, there are bikes out there that have what are called internally geared hubs, which means that it does set of derailleurs. All the gear changes happen inside the hub. And that has pros and cons. It means you only have one chainring up front and one cog in the back. So you have a simple drive train, just like mine. But you might have a range of gears that's as wide as a bike that has 18 or 27 or however many combinations you can think of. And the only real downsides to that, right, is that the hub tends to be heavier than derailleurs. That's why racing bikes still use derailleurs and not internally geared hubs. And they can cost more, although not necessarily more than the highest end derailleurs, but generally they cost more than the least expensive derailleur drivetrains. But they're really good at keeping the weather out of your drivetrain, at least out of the internal workings of the cogs. And again, an old 3-speed or a modern internally geared hub that has 8 speeds, or some of them have 11, can have a really wide range of gears. And if you're going to go ride in the driftless area for fun, you're going to want a wide range of gears. And that was an excellent question. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Let me put up my sign to remind you to be visible, predictable, alert, and assertive.
We had 2 folks who had to go, but thank you profusely. So.
Yep. I'm kind of talked out and out of water, but I'm going to answer any more questions. If anybody still has questions. Quite an hour yet.
I think I'm good. Thank you, Christopher. Chuck.
Yeah, if nobody has any other questions, we'll probably wrap up early so we don't tax Chuck's beautiful baritone. But you guys are welcome to email us and ask us questions anytime.
Yeah, that's probably what I should have ended with. My email address and telephone number are somewhere on our website, which Dar's already put up a link to that. So if you have questions that you think of later, feel free to contact me and ask them. That's part of my job.
Well, thank you very much for doing this, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate the time.
Great.
Problem. Thanks for coming.